and evaluation in some sense much more accessible to civil society organizations working at the grassroots level in different capacities, whether it be education or in other development areas, and also to make it clear that this is nothing very fancy in some way, uh, and in some way making it also cost effective for organizations to have processes and mechanisms in place, capabilities in place in-house to work on monitoring and evaluation. So that's the larger objective of this course. And Ditya, Suraj, and I have been mainly working behind this. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to have the Vikramshila team here to run the pilot version of the course. I hope you enjoy and participate. And like Suraj said, we would like all of you to generally have your videos on bandwidth permits and engage and participate as much as possible, raise questions. And also definitely share your feedback. Again, given that it's a first version, I think quite a bit will also depend on your feedback, so that if there are particular course corrections which we can incorporate along the way, there are specific things which we can incorporate along the way, we do that. Over to Suraj and Ditya. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. So today's session is a slightly jumbo session. It's planned for about 3 hours. Well, we're a few minutes into it already. And it will be completely introductory in nature, because just to get a sense of what all does one talk about when one uses terms like M&E, especially the E part, evaluation. So we plan to sort of in a slightly interactive mode, hopefully, do an elaborate introduction today. And when we meet next, which is I think in 2 weeks' time, we'll continue, with that introduction using a particular case before we move a little more into the specific, dimensions of evaluation that will be covered in later sessions. Yeah, so today is meant to be introductory, and we know that you're all engaged in some way in M&E, maybe some of you more than others, and we'll talk about the M&E environment at some point. Evaluation as a culture, often demanded by donors, often reluctantly followed by organizations. Right? I mean, there's a lot of hoopla around this, and all of that are things that we hope to cover in this course. I guess you've got an introduction which was maybe circulated by text for the 3 of us who put this course together, Ditya, Rahul, and myself. So is there, I don't know, a need to, tell you about ourselves? I don't know. I'll check with Nani and Namrata. I think already.
I think it'll be good, Suraj, since it's introductory. Let us take a little bit of time to know each other. We meet each other for 16 weeks now.
Right. Okay. Well, my name is Suraj. I'm presently affiliated with the Azim Premji University. I am a political economist by training, so mostly I'm an academic. However, I spent a few years in Vidya Bhavan, an old education institution in Udaipur, as chief executive for a few years. So I'm still associated with Vidya Bhavan. I'm also associated with Seva Mandir, another organization in Udaipur. It works on education, but also on watersheds and health and many other things. So my primary identity is as an academic, but I have some links with various civil society organizations. My interest nowadays is very much to understand policy. And I've been teaching a course at the Azim Premji University in Bangalore on evaluation for the master's students for the last several years. And I'm really looking forward to interacting with all of you, because I think all of you bring in a lot of experience, unlike, let us say, the MA students, many of whom are freshers. But yeah, so that's my little bit of association with M&E. Plus, I work with a few organizations, especially Seva Mandir and Vidya Bhavan, on issues of evaluation. I'm based in Trivandrum. I think that's, yeah, over to you, Dutya, Rahul.
Would you be in a position to just switch on your video and introduce?
Sorry, should I go? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dvitya. And I have been working in education in various sort of roles for about like a decade, more than a decade, actually. My heart belongs in implementation, but over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working with J-PAL South Asia on evaluations primarily of large-scale education projects. And I think one of the things that I've found is that evaluation information doesn't necessarily get translated correctly enough or promptly enough to implementing organizations for them to be able to respond to the findings or whatever to improve the program. So over the last year or so, I've been thinking more and more about how evaluation can be useful to implementing organizations. And I suppose I'm glad that way that Rahul Suraj thought of me for this. So it's been a wonderful sort of bringing together of two of my sort of core areas. And I'm really looking forward to sort of engaging with you on this course over the next few months.
Thanks, Vidya. Thanks, Suraj. I'm Rahul. Again, my primary affiliation with Azim is with Azim Premji University. I work with the Azim Premji Foundation and also Wipro Foundation, and teach a little bit at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Primary research interest areas are sociology of education, education policies and programs. Suraj and I have been collaborating on research and other related work for quite some time now. And it's wonderful to have Ditya join this. And I am as much a learner like most of you in this program. Probably will have very little to contribute, but let's see as we go ahead. Yeah. Thank you. Namrata, if it's okay, we won't do a kind of a introduction of the team today.
Yes.
Yeah, and we'll share some kind of a format in which the team can share their photos and a little bit about themselves, and get them to know along the way, because otherwise it will become
it will become very good.
And while online is of course never the best way of doing things, one advantage is you get to see everybody's names, and there's no people at the back and the front. You see everybody sort of, so there's some tiny advantage maybe. So, and I think eventually what is planned is after this set of sessions is over, down the line to have an in-person kind of interaction, to work on specific maybe evaluation projects that you will have and so on. So that's at that point, hopefully, the dynamic will be a little different when we meet in person. Then let's start. I'm going to switch to some slides now, but please feel free. We are a small enough group. Please feel free to, I will be doing much of the session today, and Dvitya and Rahul will come in at other points in other sessions. And so may I just request that, whenever you need, a little bit of clarification or make some points or bring up something from your experience, even in the introductory session today, please feel free. I guess we are all used to the Zoom kind of procedures. There's the raise hand feature, or you can just interrupt me as well. Quite happy with that. So please do that, because as we all know, unless we are active in this mode, it tends to become a little kind of one-sided. So let's all keep that in mind. You're all in the education space, so we know what best practices when it comes to these kinds of sessions. So, all right. So the word evaluation is interesting because what are the other words, I guess, that we can think of? Assessment, appraisal, right? These are the kinds of maybe terms we often use. And there's something I at least feel and is important in the term evaluation. Though we often use these terms interchangeably: assessment, appraisal, rating. I mean, many other, I guess. And if you if you think of the term in Indian languages, I don't know. Many of you are Bengalis. What would be the term? It would be Mulyayan or something like that, I think, right? What would be the term for evaluation? Mulyayan. Yeah. And in Hindi, it's Mulyankan. In Malayalam also, the word mulya is there in many of these, right? And the word evaluation, therefore, the mulya part is the value part. And I really like that. And hopefully we will see as we go through today's session, other sessions, why this, what we make of this term value when we say evaluation, which I think is probably, I like that over words like assessment and appraisal. So evaluation in some sense, and you all been doing this in some way or the other as well as part of your other activities, is about putting a value on some aspects of an intervention, right? So we really will pick up the value part of evaluation, the mulya part of Mulyayan. So what does it mean to put a value, right? What are the ways in which we can put a value on something? On what are the aspects of an intervention on which we might put a value? So we'll come back to this term, this root term value, mulya, in evaluation. Before starting, just want to mention, and I think Nani has circulated a pre-program assessment that I don't know how many of you got a chance to fill it up. If you haven't, please do so soon. The idea was just to get a sense of what you think about different aspects of evaluation. What is your own background? What you hope to get? Hopefully, some of this will come through discussions today and in other sessions. But yeah, please see if you can fill it if you haven't already. The other was a pre-reading that was circulated, and I think I understand it was circulated fairly late in the day, so you may not have had a chance to look at it. But please keep it and please have a look at it when you get a chance. Between today's session and the next session, we actually have 2 weeks, so there's a little bit of time to do that. The pre-reading was a recent issue of the Wipro Foundation magazine called Samohik Pahal, an issue which is devoted to issues of evaluation. Most of the issue has short reads. So do look at some of those. Good. So let's start. So in an introductory sense, let me say a few things at the danger of maybe going over things which are so obvious to all of you. And if it is very obvious, it's okay, but maybe you can also contribute. Please do sort of bring in some of your thoughts or experience straight away in this introductory session as well. First thing to say is that much of what is called evaluation, putting a value on different aspects of some activity intervention, is pretty commonsensical. Most of it is commonsensical, and it's something we do all the time. Often just subconsciously. We make decisions all the time. We look back on decisions we've made, even personally, right? And in some sense, it is putting a value on particular things we decided to do, not do. Sometimes we do it subconsciously. We're socialized into many things, but we still evaluate subconsciously, often consciously. It's something I would say natural. It's something we do all the time. And so much of what is called evaluation, or M&E, monitoring and evaluation, is really a kind of systematizing of something we do, something which is intuitive, which is very commonsensical. And I'm saying this because sometimes evaluation is seen as, there's the kind of language, baseline, end line, evaluation, matlab, survey karo, baseline, end line, evaluation, right? The ways in which, it is reduced to certain, particular, I don't know, let's call it tools, or often quant-based, survey-based kind of tools, and some so-called analysis comes out of it, and that's it, right? That's evaluation. And often that throws people off. For some people, it's intimidating because they use some fancier versions of these kinds of survey analysis, data analysis. So wanted to just point out something which I think is hopefully obvious to all of you. It is really commonsensical, and not to get too caught up in tools at the cost of not understanding what is the activity of evaluation, or what does it mean to put a value on, right? So we'll talk about what are the kinds of things in an intervention when we look back on something we are doing, an intervention, a program. What are the ways in which we put value? But just to point out that, of course, we'll come to things like baseline and end line and things like that. But one of the ideas for this course is to locate all these things in something broader. Even if, let us say, particular funders or particular things, donors that you have may want very kind of narrow ways of evaluating, right? But this course is about getting us to think a little more broadly about what really does it mean to put a value on things. I'm saying this also because some of the evolving evaluation culture in India is fairly narrow. And I've seen this in, especially, when it comes to some of the CSRs, not all. I think there's a lot of heterogeneity, but many CSRs, perhaps because they know no better, or because this is convenient, or this fits with other ways in which corporates run, they have a particular, very narrow way of evaluating, and so often, the kinds of things we might be discussing in this course, you may not always have a chance to deploy them, because we live in a world where some of these things are given, right? But I'm saying this also because I think there is a need to push back in a constructive manner, right? And to change the language of evaluation, the culture of evaluation. And so those who are practitioners, like all of you, if you get around to all the nitty-gritties of evaluation, as hopefully we will do in this set of sessions, it might help us to have maybe better conversations with funders, as to what does it, right? How should one go about these things? I'm maybe overly optimistic on this right now, but there is a need, right? I think we are all in a program space where evaluation is often not up to us in terms of deciding the parameters. And so I think we should slightly seize that ground wherever possible. And but for that, we need to appreciate, right, where people come from, why they use particular techniques, in order to be able to constructively maybe, think of how to address those. So yeah, so there's a lot, I think. So I guess the request is therefore to keep the thinking a little broad, not just trying to link everything directly to a particular program you're doing, where maybe some of this is not directly relevant, but think of it a little more broadly. The other thing to mention is that sometimes common sense or even observation can be misleading. And one example, I'm sitting in Trivandrum, so something from here is, there's this famous so-called Kerala model of development. And one of the things that was touted from that was huge expansion in education, literacy. And so in Trivandrum district, female literacy doubled in the years 51 to 71. And that was the time in which the Kerala model was set up in the mid-50s, right? So now, mostly when we see this kind of, let us say, fact, right, or data, the common sense would be to say, oh, okay, so when the Kerala model came, in the ensuing 15, 20 years, clearly, female literacy expanded. And that was one of the aspects of the Kerala model, education, health, land reform, and so on. So there instinctively, many of us, when we see this kind of information, instinctively we tend to connect it with the program itself. Whatever was done as part of the Kerala model of development, a certain kind of big push on education and health and so on, it must be that which is causing female literacy to double, right? I don't know about you, but certainly that's my instinct when I see these kinds of things, right? We sort of casually we connect these, and we might even put a value on the Kerala model because, oh, look, female literacy doubled, and that is substantial increase. Some parts of our country, even today, 55% female literacy in effect, these sub-regions, is a big deal, right? And we're talking about 51 to 71 over half a century ago. Turns out, now, okay, so here's another piece of information which might slightly counter that instinct, which is the next district to Trivandrum, which is called Kanyakumari, which is actually in Tamil Nadu. In Tamil Nadu also in 1951, female literacy was 28%. Coincidentally, the exact same figure as it was for Trivandrum. And in Kanyakumari, which was not part of the Kerala model, because it was in Tamil Nadu, also female literacy almost doubled from 51 to 71. It went from 28 to something like 53 or 54, right? Now, if I were to give that second piece of information, then that is sometimes enough for me to slightly hold back and say, oh, okay. In fact, even without the Kerala model, a part of Tamil Nadu, which happens to be close to this, also had a remarkable increase in female literacy. So is it really the Kerala model? What's happening, right? So often just putting information in an interesting manner, which is, by the way, what one aspect of evaluation called impact evaluation often does, is just putting information in an interesting manner, which makes us think about what is a sensible way of putting a value on this, right? So if I had not told you about Kanyakumari, I'm guessing that you might think, oh, okay, pretty big increase, coinciding with the Kerala model and all the stuff that they did in education particularly. But lo and behold, same kind of outcomes happened in a place where that kind of input Kerala model was not operating. So then what value do we put on the Kerala model, right? Would be a question. The other is then what is happening? Why is female literacy doubling, not just in Trivandrum, but also in Kanyakumari, right? So that more questions come up, right? So I think one of the things that evaluation can do is, even with minimal information of the sort I'm presenting, when looked at through particular perspectives, allows us to slightly counter our instinct, maybe ask better questions about value, right? And so this question I put here, was it because of the Kerala model? And the word because is quite a loaded term because it has the word cause in it, right? Is there some kind of causal property of the Kerala model when we say it's because of it? Can we attribute this outcome to the Kerala model? And I'm not really describing the model, but a whole bunch of things which were done in the name of education and other things. Is it because becomes a very weighty question, and it turns out that this is not an easy question to answer. One of the things that has happened in recent years, as you might know, because of the prominence of now many organizations which are doing impact evaluation, and the recent Nobel Prize, to Abhijit Esther, Michael, right? And their work is very much about impact evaluation, and it's not just them. There's in the last few years there's a big turn towards emphasizing this. So we'll come to it later on, but it's all about this word cause, big cause. I mean, how do we attribute causal value it's very slippery, and I hope intuitively you will feel that. There are some techniques. We'll talk about all that. But the other question is, even if we think it's because of the Kerala model, which I'm saying it's not clear at all if it's same thing is happening in Kanyakumari in terms of outcomes. The other question is, if we say something is because, we surely want to know how, right? What was it about the functioning of the Kerala model, the specifics of the intervention, that somehow created some outcome that we think is good, improving female literacy, right? It turns out that is also not an easy thing to figure out, right? So this issue of causal attribution, the because part, is tricky. Often when impact evaluation is done, they don't still ask the second question, how, right? How, what are the processes through which a set of interventions plays out and causes, if we think there is something causal to it, causes some outcome that we value, right? Just to say Kerala model came and lo and behold, there's female literacy improved, somehow, right, intuitively is not sufficient. So these are all interesting things which then start going outside our instinct and common sense.
So Rich, can I just interrupt you
Yes,
for a
please.
minute? So you said that if in case we are talking about causality, asking the question how it happened is crucial.
Yeah,
that is what you said.
yeah, I'm making that suggestion, knowing that in much of the impact evaluations which happen, they don't quite do that. So this is something for us to decide for ourselves, right? So I guess I'm making this suggestion that without that, I feel, as somebody who's seeing some program, some intervention, and if somebody says that, oh, this program had a 15% impact on, let us say, children's attendance, you hear these kinds of statements often, and they say, oh, we did some kind of causal framework, some control treatment, some something, we did some end-line baseline, and we came to this conclusion that this set of interventions, it had a, let's say, 15% increase in attendance, girls attendance, or some particular group for which was being targeted, right? Now, statements of that sort, and you're probably familiar with that way of articulating evaluation, right? Notice that the how is not mentioned there. Right? Even if we grant that, okay, because of the setup, we can estimate the impact to be fairly big, 15% or whatever, it still doesn't say the how. And so one of the things, and we'll do this more elaborately, of course, later, is to not be satisfied with those kinds of outcome-based kind of statements about impact, right? Which are causal because of the particular technique, but to ask the how question. Now you all probably do make these theories of change, right? That's often proposals demanded, and often even otherwise it's often a useful thing. So a theory of change, and we will spend a whole session or more on this later. A theory of change is a theoretical account of the how, right? That if we do this, then this will happen, that will happen, and eventually some outcome will happen that we value, right? But it's a theoretical account, correct? A theory of change is typically written as part of a proposal when you are imagining or designing a program, right? But this question here, since Nani is asking it, is not a theoretical question, right? It's after the fact, not before the fact of the intervention. So once you do an intervention and you find that there is some outcome, you can then ask the how question. How is it that if we did this, we got some outcome that we value, such as 15%? And all I'm suggesting is often that is not done in impact evaluation. Not always. I mean, it's a pretty a diverse field, and so now. So we'll come to this, but yeah, at least in this set of sessions, we think it's important to look at the how question and not just the estimate of outcome question. Right. So yes, we plan to. But as I'm suggesting, this is not a done thing necessarily by all evaluators. Right? Often people are quite content with that kind of statement. Oh, I did a good kind of framework, and therefore I can conclude that it's 50% causal, right? The kind of the because thing, 15% improvement, and our target was 10%. So you exceeded targets and you're fine, right? None of that kind of language is about the how. The how is unfortunately asked in typical kind of funding situations only when you don't meet targets, and then and then it's kind of blame maybe or kind of scapegoating. Well, maybe, I don't know how fair that would be, but it's not a serious understanding of how things, right? How social processes work. So whatever the outcome, whether you meet targets or not, the how question, at least in this set of sessions, we will take to be important.
Yeah.
But down the line, yeah. All right. Let me just pause just to see if I'm okay. Stop the screen share for a wee bit. Yeah, just to check in with all of you. So far, so good. Right, we're just talking about something pretty common sense. I'm a little hesitant to do all the things I did because you're all been doing this, and so yeah, I don't want to say something so obvious. But if it feels like that, some of this, please just add some of your experiences. That will maybe thicken our thing. But otherwise, okay, I think, right? All right. Then let me just go back to. All right. So moving on, we often think of evaluation as an integral part of any intervention. Now, and why? Because it's natural to want to know whether something works, right? We are doing interventions because we have certain hopes, right? We have certain things in mind, certain expectations. And so this language of does something work, I think is a good one. Is a simple, colloquial, but sharp question. Does something work? But turns out it's not easy to figure out, right? That's the value part. How much it works, how it works, what is the implication of saying that a particular intervention worked well, right? And in that context, there is something in the field of policy studies called a policy cycle or stages. So this is very conventional in policy studies, to do this kind of thing. And so what's the idea? That you come up with, it's a cycle after all, you can begin anywhere, but let's begin kind of where the intuitive place to begin would be, let us say, formulating, right? We formulate some kind of intervention. We can call it a program, we can call it a yojana, we can call it a policy. We'll come to all these terms later, but some kind of intervention in society. Let's call it formulation. And then we come up with an implementation plan, right? How do we actually operationalize it? And then we actually implement it. And of course, many of us are in that implementation space. I think Dhrutia mentioned that's where her heart is, right? And many of us, I mean, much of intervention is about implementation, right? That's really what interventions are about. And then, according to this policy cycle idea, then we evaluate. And that evaluation will then allow us to make certain decisions about continuing that intervention, upscaling it, downscaling it. Scaling is of different sorts, right? Taking it to more people, but also more intensity. There are different ways of thinking about scaling, but upping it, downing it, terminating it, right? So these are all kinds of decision points that can come out of an evaluation. And that decision point can itself then allow for another cycle, right, of formulating and so on, right? So that's this conventional idea of a policy cycle. Now, many people have critiqued this, so I'm not saying that this is how it works, but conventionally or traditionally, evaluation is seen in this kind of manner, right? That we come up with stuff, we come up with planning to implement it, we look back, put value on it, that's evaluation, and use that to decide things and go forward and formulate again to have sharper implementation and so on, right? Now, is this a picture of reality? I doubt it. But so I'm not in any way suggesting this is how it works or should work, but I'm just saying that this is a powerful idea conventionally in the field of policy studies. So that's one way to think of an evaluation, right? And this way of thinking about it is this idea of, does it work, right? So in that sense, evaluation is very much an activity of looking backwards, right? It's really about having done something, some intervention, and looking back and putting value on it. It's not a forward-looking activity. I'm saying this because these terms are used in so many different ways. And sometimes you will see terms like this used by people for a forward-looking activity. But traditionally, and I think with good reason, evaluation is really about looking back on having implemented something. And the hope is that will then carry forward, right, to further decisions. So this is, let's say, the world of best practice. Whether or not we follow this, it's something we can talk about later. But the reason this is part of best practice, because it's sensible, maybe, right? It's reasonable to think of the question of whether something works, how much it works, to factor into how we think of interventions, right? That's the idea of locating the evaluation. I'm saying this because many evaluations don't nicely fit into this. So we'll come back to it. Okay. Yes, I see. Yes, Athanu, please go ahead.
Yeah, according to this model, actually, what I feel that sometimes during implementation, there are certain milestones. And as an implementer or as a field worker, we need to understand what are the milestones. And after certain period of time, whether we have achieved that particular milestone or not, is this evaluation part of evaluation? Or should we talk it as assessment, and evaluation is only happen after certain intervention or end of the intervention? So what is your position in this regard?
Yeah, it's a good question, Athanu. So in this particular policy cycle idea, right, what's up on the slide, suggests that evaluation is after the bulk of implementation, right? Evaluation, the purpose in this kind of way of thinking is for fine-tuning it in the next cycle, right? And that's why the word monitoring, right, is used. So M&E is often used in the same breath, right? People just say M&E. And we'll talk about monitoring and how it is similar and different to evaluation in a little while. But when we think of what the kinds of things that Athanu is mentioning, right? I'm implementing something, and implementation occurs over time, right? And so at different points in that period of implementation, I look back, right? Implementation is not complete. So that's the kind of thing which is conventionally called monitoring, right? The monitoring definitely has important elements of evaluation. For example, monitoring is also about putting value, right? And looking at how it's going so that you can tweak an intervention, change it, right? Even as it is being implemented, right? So Athanu, will come back to this. There are elements of evaluation which are along the lines of what you are suggesting, right? About whether or not we are reaching milestones, right? But evaluation is more than that. So one kind of way to answer it is to say it is part of what you're saying, but there's a lot more to it. And one of the problems often is that evaluation gets reduced to certain things, right? Target achieve ho raha hai ki nahi, right? Okay, thumbs up, move on. Next tranche of funds are being released by donor, right? And whatever, I mean, so this kind of utilization certificate or which is all based on certain targets, certain milestones, with the possibility of tweaking it as it proceeds, right? This is a very everyday reality of programs, right? So right now, think of the term evaluation as covering that and more, right? So it is a backward-looking activity in the sense I mentioned it, whether it's monitoring or after the program finishes, right? Or as Atanu was saying, during the program, it is looking back at what you have done, whether the implementation is, let us say, partial, right, or complete. Either way, it is looking back in order to either tweak that current cycle or future cycles, right? If you want to make a distinction between cycles. So Atanu, we'll come back to what you're saying in a big way.
Thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
Because we do want to understand the implementation space, right? Putting a value on implementation. But that's one thing we'll generally need to be comfortable about. These terms are used in different ways in, and so the thrust of this course is not so much about defining these terms, precisely because these terms have different meanings to different people, but to get the idea, right? What are useful ways to think about an intervention and useful ways to put value. So in that sense, Atanu, both what you said and the version in this slide, which is after implementation, right? Both belong, and we'll be covering both in this in these sessions. Yeah. All right. And here's a quote from America. We'll just read through this together. And the idea here is that often we are very certain about what works and what doesn't. And this is from the 1990s, where in the Clinton administration in America, there was a lot of programmatic push, a lot of social welfare programs were, happened. And so this is a comment on that. So let's read this together. In the last 6 months, I have been repeatedly impressed. This is Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who's a well-known politician and part of government in the US. In the last 6 months, I've been repeatedly impressed by the number of members of the Clinton administration who have assured me with great vigor that something or other is known in an area of social policy, which to the best of my understanding is not known at all. This seems to me perilous. It is quite possible to live with uncertainty, with the possibility, even the likelihood that one is wrong. But beware of certainty where none exists. Ideological certainty easily degenerates into an insistence upon ignorance. Pretty loaded, the last part of that. But I like this, I guess, because it really calls attention to especially with program designers, right? Who have great certainty, as this quote is suggesting, regarding what works. And so this business of what works turns out to be very slippery. And I think as people doing programs, you would probably really relate to this, because it's also very contextual. Even if you know that something worked in a particular context, it's never an easy business to roll it out somewhere else and expect the same, right? Social programs are social. Societies are contextual, right? And so this hubris, almost this overconfidence about what works, and a lot of policy making relies on that, right? People have to defend their policies, so they have to overclaim, on that. And so this is a big issue. There's about 50 years back, there was a development scholar by the name of Albert Hirschman. You might have heard of him. He was commissioned by the World Bank in the 60s to look at World Bank projects all over the world, including he came to, he looked at projects in what is now Bangladesh, but this was in the 60s. He also looked at the Damodar Valley program in Latin America and so on. And he really, in his book, though it's from the mid 60s, those who are interested, it's still worth reading. based on that. Because it really underlines this point in this quote, which is that this idea that something worked, once you start scratching more and more, you get less and less confident. And he was talking about big World Bank funded projects back in the day, right? And he was saying the confidence with which these were advanced, there's no real justification for them once you start really looking at it. So that's one of the things now, which I think is hard to get into evaluation culture, because evaluation culture is fairly top down in India, despite all the best practices that we're going to discuss in this course. Fact is that donors or others with some power over an intervention decide some of these things, right, or insist on some of the things. There might be some room for discussion, but there is certainly power involved. And so it would be nice to take this kind of discussion, delicate discussion, to donors about, right? And often I see, NGOs also have to overclaim, right? Have to put confident targets, because that's the game that sort of the donor-driven thing gives us. So if we are all a little more relaxed about what works, right, and a little more honest and a little less overconfident, it might do good. So that's part of the general culture of evaluation. We'll come to that. Many people have commented on this, and at least my limited sense of programs in India is that this really applies, and we have to overclaim, and we have to create those indicators and timelines and targets, and then the donor will cut those things short or will make us do more, right, and so on. So that's the kind of thing we are often in. So how to have those conversations with donors, with evaluators, is something we should think about. I'm aware that that it is an asymmetric space, but I think there is room to maneuver. Even with the organizations I work with in Udaipur, I see that some funders are a little more open to this. But then I think we as practitioners need to speak that language, right? And have a way to talk about, right, what's a sensible way to put value. And it's not enough to sort of get a little frustrated at, let us say, some kind of top-down evaluation frame that we really don't buy into, right? So how to constructively give to donors who might be a little willing, I think that's important to look at. Okay, so let me move on. You're all able to hear me, right? No problem?
Yes.
Okay. Here in Trivandrum, it's raining cats and dogs now. So, all right. So let's some other kind of fairly obvious things. What is a program? A social program? It's, again, I don't think we need to really put hard definitions on these things, but I think we all know what we're talking about. It's an organized effort to address some problem, right? And evaluation is really about the use of some kind of, as I put in a previous slide, systematizing common sense, right? Using some kind of procedures to systematically investigate, put a value on a program, right? As broad as that. So these terms, which are often used, people often say program evaluation, but the idea of evaluation, of putting a value on an intervention, can work on anything that you call it as an intervention, right? So here I have listed a bunch. Coincidentally, they all start with P. So project, program, plan, policy regime. I guess you can see that in some way or the other, these are all about intervention, right? And so again, it's at some point futile to define, right, what are the boundaries between these. And in fact, it happens very often that what somebody calls a project, somebody else calls a program, and a third person calls a policy, right? And so not worth getting fixated on this. I will just note that when these kinds of terms are used, there is a sense of level So what I might call a program, you might call a project, no doubt. But in my mind, and in your mind too, there's a sense in which a project is, let us say, the most micro. You could think of a set of projects as a program, or a set of programs as a plan, or a set of plans as a policy, right? In that sense, there is a kind of level difference, even if we might disagree on what those levels are, right? And people do it all the time. So in this course, we are going to be using the word, often the word program, but in this kind of very flexible manner, right? To mean some kind of systematic intervention. It could be like that, like I gave you the example of the Kerala model, right? That's a policy regime. That's at the highest level in that sense, right? That has many policies, part of it, including and many education programs which are part of the policy and so on, right? So, but this idea of evaluation can be taken at any level, because it is really about trying to put a value on different aspects of some intervention, whether it's mega or micro. All right. In terms of approaches to evaluation, as I slightly indicated earlier, in the mainstream, because there are lots of different evaluatory approaches, and that's important to understand, that while that is the case, there is also a mainstream. And I guess the kinds of evaluators that one might often meet are part of that mainstream. And that mainstream sees evaluation as a technical activity and as a method-oriented activity. Hence, survey karna hai, endline baseline data aana hai, sampling, right? This is the kind of language which is used. These are all very method-specific language. Now, what's the connection between this specific method language and evaluation, putting a value, right? There seems to be a huge gulf. And so we'll talk about that quite a bit. Especially if we want to slowly change the culture of evaluation, that big, slightly fuzzy objective down the line, for practitioners over time. Then we need to know about what is this mainstream, which is seen as technical, and in what sense is the technical approach, which we'll come to later on in this course, in what sense is it putting a value, right? And in what sense, what are other ways of putting value, which may not belong in what we can call mainstream? So that becomes important to ask. And on my slide here, I've put a kind of heavy word, hegemony, in policy knowledge, because just to signal that this space of evaluation and, it's really unequal, right? And there are certain kinds of things which dominate, and that dominance changes over time. For example, if you look at India's Planning Commission, which is no longer there today, but which was there for decades, right? From the early 50s. The Planning Commission of India had a very interesting part of it called the PEO, the Planning Evaluation Organization, PEO. Oddly, their old website is still there. I think they have not taken it down. The old Planning Commission website with the PEO, you can even access some of the old PEO reports. I'm mentioning that because once upon a time in our own country, right, the way in which evaluation was taught by the Planning Commission was interesting. It's very different. You won't see this kind of language of baseline, endline, and targets. Well, targets has been there, but the way in which evaluation was thought of by the Planning Commission in its own in-house evaluation, the PEO, was very different. Even outside India, if you look at the US, where a lot of these things came from, decades back, it was different. Today, especially in the last 15 odd years, 20 odd years, the way in which evaluation has been thought about has changed. And the reality today, which is very CSR driven, to some extent foundation driven, to some extent government programs also, right? Share space in civil society organizations. The way they think about evaluation is quite different. So we'll come to that. So what counts as mainstream changes over time. And so it is important, I think, in this course to be very intimately familiar with the mainstream, right, approach, its logic, how it puts value, and to have our own sense, right, of what is it lacking, or what kind of conversations can we have, right, to change this. But there is a hegemony, and yeah, we can have discussions outside this if there's interest on this. But many things to think about in terms of whose voice regarding what is evaluation counts. We'll talk a lot about participatory evaluation, right? That's a buzzword now. हर एक चीज में participation होना है. So what does participatory evaluation really mean? And at what point does participation happen? Many things which are called participatory evaluation, you will see that it's a very reduced form of participation. But we have to jump through these hoops. We have to say something is participatory now, because that's also become kind of the language that we are forced to speak because of the way in which evaluation gets talked about. So all of that is something that we hope that this set of sessions will address. And the question of values, right? So if evaluation, Mulyayan, is about putting value, which values, right? Whose values, who decides them, right? Becomes very, very important. And so I've got a small quote here from Nehru. This is quoted by Verrier Elwin, the anthropologist and great friend of Adivasi India, in one of his books from the 1960s. He quotes Nehru as saying, "We should judge results not by statistics or the amount of money spent, but by the quality of human character that is evolved." Putting it out there because it's so out of what we normally think, right? We should judge results not by statistics or amount of money spent, and that is really what mainstream evaluation is. Nehru is putting in this quote some quality of human character. I mean, this doesn't sit well at all with what we understand as evaluation. So whose values? Well, in this quote, yeah, some value about human character and evolution, whatever that means, right? So I'm saying this because we need to recover, I feel, the word value in evaluation, and ask, what do we mean by value? Right? And I think hopefully that will be a recurring theme. Every now and then we can return to this, even as we go through the elements of mainstream evaluation, right? All of that, which is useful. I think we are doing this course because we find many aspects of mainstream evaluation, the best practices, useful. But the point is to repeatedly go back to this idea of power, right, and value in it. In this context, some authors have come up with an evaluation tree, and I'll explain what this is about. This is Carden and Alkin. They have an article and they have a book on this. You can see that they've got this picture of a tree, which I've just taken from them. They've got three main branches, right? And so they talk about really three branches. And what they've done is they look at existing evaluations, people who do evaluations. This is all Western, this particular, tree, but they've tried to say which kinds of evaluation studies will belong to which branch of this tree. And so I'll just spend a little bit of time explaining this, because I think this is helpful just as a kind of in an introductory sense. Yeah. So they have got the methods branch, the value branch, and the use branch, right? The methods branch, which increasingly is what mainstream evaluation today is about. Okay, the methods branch. The methods branch focuses on particular techniques, often quantitative data, statistical techniques of putting value, right, on implementation, on impact. When I said, 28 to 55% was the jump in female literacy, right? it's a quantitative indicator. And why, right? I mean, you can ask, why do you reduce something like female literacy to some number, right? I mean, are you not missing many things when you, right? But we are so used to this, right? Counting, right? To quantitative indicators. So the methods branch, which is now on the ascendant, really, everywhere, and with particular techniques of impact evaluation, which has gotten more and more attention in recent times. So we'll spend a lot of time on impact evaluation. It's very, very methods oriented. So that's one branch of the evaluation tree. The second branch is the use branch, which emphasizes to what extent evaluation findings are useful, right, are actionable. And so it's really looking at evaluation as the very instrumental thing, right? Tell me, from this evaluation, if you've done some evaluation, the use kind of approach will ask, tell me from your evaluation findings what I should do, right? So there's this idea again of that conventional policy cycle, that the idea of an evaluation is to be useful, immediately useful. See, use is also, I mean, use can be of different sorts, right? We can learn something without it being immediately actionable. But this idea of use is about immediate. And one often hears cases where, some kind of survey showed something and immediately the funder pulled some plug because some target was not reached, right? I mean, it's a very narrow way of looking at use, which sometimes gets practiced. So there's that use branch. And then there's a third, which they call the value branch, which is really asking what are the values that matter when we think of placing value. So evaluation is about putting value, but the value branch is saying, what values do we bring into the act of putting value? So what are the values that should inform evaluation, right? So for example, people nowadays talk about not just participatory evaluation, but feminist evaluation, right? Or green evaluation. So you could have, for example, an education project, right? Which may not be directly connected with gender. Almost everything is indirectly connected, but directly connected with gender or with ecology. But you might still say, we want to put a feminist lens or an ecological lens in placing value, right? So the lens we put, right, in when we look at how to place value, that lens itself is a matter of what do we value, right? So what is the value regarding the act of valuing, right? That's what this third branch is about. What is now today, I think, agreed is some kind of participation. We really need to unpack what does this mean, because it's become such a overused term, right? What does participation mean in evaluation? But because now it's become mainstream to think that participation is a value that any evaluation should have, right? But what kind of participation, right? And what are the other values, right? Would be interesting. So there are now interesting examples in India. For example, one of my colleagues at Azim Premji University, who's a health specialist, did an evaluation of a watershed program, but from a health lens. A watershed program which is not about health, but was evaluated using a health perspective, a health equity perspective. So we can do these interesting things, but those are the possibilities that the value branch brings up. Having said that, you will immediately see that it's not an either or, right? Why can't we have combine these branches of the tree? No doubt. So the idea here is not to say that an evaluation has to be one or the other of these, but to ask what is the emphasis, right? Even if we want, I mean, right? We want value, we want method, right? We want use. All of that maybe makes sense, but what do we prioritize? And one thing maybe we can say is that today the methods branch is prioritized definitely over the values branch. To some extent, the methods branch claims to be a use branch, right? That the whole idea of a rigorous method to put value is to be able to find actionable results. But you will find that often very methodologically sophisticated evaluations are not acted upon, because the world of action, right, is a world of many other things, right? About funders and power and ideology and many other things. So it's not clear that these three go together, but we might like them to go together. So we'll have more to say about these things, at least implicitly as the course proceeds. But I hope you see that, yeah, this is a useful thing to consider, right? What is the kind of emphasis we give in an evaluation? Yes, Atanu.
Sorry, I have another question.
Perfect.
You talked about three branches, huge methodology as well as value branch. So if there is any problem at the design level, then how faulty design can be evaluated also.
Yeah.
And how it is in these, actually incorporated in these branches.
Right. Now, notice when you say faulty, you're already putting a value on it, correct? So,
Yeah, that's true.
right. So on what basis do we put that value that something is faulty is something we should talk about, right? So, and that we will. So, but this is a very important question, Atanu. Thanks for bringing it up. So, we'll be covering this in today's session itself as a little bit. So at what point in an intervention, right? Do we place values? What are the aspects of an intervention on which we place value? Do we place a value on design? Do we place a value on implementation? Do we place a value on, let us say, how society, some aspect of society has been changed, right? As you will see, we will place a evaluation can help us put value in all these things, right? Including what you're calling design, right? To say that something was faulty, right? At the design stage is itself an act of evaluation, right? So on what basis, what is the reasonable way of putting a value on design? That something was well designed, poorly designed, right? Faulty design, as you put it, right? Is itself evaluation. So that will be very much part of what we'll be doing in this course. In fact, that will be the first, after the introduction, we'll be moving to evaluating design. Right. And I think intuitively, I guess I'm reading into your question, you believe that to be important, right? Rather than just looking at impact. By the term impact, we mean impact on society, kind of, which is different from asking questions about design. So yeah, why can't we do all these? And why should we not do all these, right? When we think about, after all, evaluation in its fullest sense is really, right, coming back to that idea, right? It's about understanding an intervention well, which means all aspects of it, putting value on all aspects, and certainly, therefore, design qualifies. Yes. All right. So far, so good. And so we have an activity that we thought, just to break the flow, which is sort of what is mentioned here. So maybe I should just pause here. And I think Atanu's question is very timely, because that's sort of what we want to sort of discuss a little bit. But before we do that, let me just ask any clarifications on what we've done so far. And Atanu, I appreciate the questions, and would really request others too. I guess some of you are traveling or not in a, right, maybe may not be in an easy position maybe to engage, but please do. And I'm, like I said, I'm a little hesitant because much of this is well known to you. So please add stuff. You'll have lots of actual experiences to share in this. So let's just see if there are anything that we've discussed so far that you want to discuss, and then we'll go to a kind of breakout kind of thing. Yes, Nani.
The evaluation routes, the diagram that you, maybe, it becomes clearer to me as the course progresses, but at this stage, it is quite unclear. And like, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I happen to think it's a useful thing, that's
Yeah.
why I at least put it into a slide. So, and the reason I think it's useful is because it suggests 3 very different priorities that evaluation can take, right? Hence the 3 branches. Knowing that, you can mix and match, right? I mean, but still, if you think of, do you want to give where do you want to give higher priority? Do you want to give higher priority in the act of assigning value? Evaluation as putting value, remember, right? Do you want to give greater priority on the rigor or the method? I won't believe any kind of value that you put unless you give me solid quantitative data with good sample and whatever, right? The language of that kind of survey kind of thing. Otherwise, it doesn't count for me. Suppose I say that, right? Then I'm taking a very strong position, a very method-oriented position about evaluation, right?
Yeah.
So that's the method branch, right? Emphasizing method. I'm saying that because if you see the old PEO reports, there was not the kind of method focus that we see today, right? At this point, I'm not saying what is good or not. I'm just saying that that's what that branch is, the method branch. The value branch is about asking, right? What are the values I should bring in as an evaluator, right? Now, it doesn't mean you can't do this and still do rigorous whatever method, but I'm just saying, but usually those who do method don't put that kind of priority on the values you bring. So the values branch is really asking, is saying that a legitimate evaluation is that which is conducted in a way which emphasizes the values that I care about. And I care about participation. I care about feminist perspective. I care about, let us say, caste perspective. I care about ecology, right? I care about human rights. And so whatever it is I put a value on, those values should enter the process of evaluation. That's what the value branch is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
So at the roots, there is a mention of epistemology, if I'm not wrong, and 2 other terms, right? So those, how do you connect epistemology? Of course, you can draw a connection to probably values, and if you can just, once take us back to that slide, please.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and evaluation routes, the term you're using is just the title, right, of the piece from which, so we haven't really discussed that term so much. I was just focusing on those branches there.
Yeah, I was actually fascinated by that diagram. So I noted the authors and the name of the reference. Yeah. So we have 2 other terms. One is social inquiry, one is social accountability, and one is epistemology, right? At the base of this tree.
Right. Social accountability, equity, epistemology, right?
Yeah. So how do we draw a connection between these 3 terms and use methods and valuing?
So this is a complex question. Let me just say straight off. So I'll attempt a short answer here, but I think I will also need to think more about this. What Carden and Alkin say, they've got a book-length treatment of this as well, right? So epistemology, of course, big word, but right, it really is about what is the legitimate construction of knowledge, right? What counts as knowledge, right? And what doesn't count. So what's legitimate, what's not in the construction of knowledge is what epistemology focuses on, right? So that term can be used for each of these, right? Evaluation knowledge findings, right? You could say are legitimate only if they use a methods branch or a value branch, right? So that's the root. I mean, that root can lead to any of these branches, right? You could say the value branch, right? I'm taking the value branch because that is the epistemology for me. That legitimate knowledge comes only if I use a perspective of evaluation which uses these values. Right. So that's how, but you could say the same of methods. Right. So that's the accountability. If I remember Card and Alkin, this is why I think I need to go back and see the way in which they use it, because the word accountability used in so many different ways, right, that it's hard to say. I think they may not use it. So the term accountability usually, right, we say in Indian languages, Jawabdehi in Hindi or equivalent, right? It's about answerability and enforceability. Those are the two things which accountability today is now. It's a kind of accepted thing that accountability is these two. I don't know if they mean it in that sense. Right? Answerability to who, of course, is the question, and enforceability by whom. Right? Those are the questions. Then accountability will come to. So this I need to check. Right? In what sense is this equity? Yeah, equity. I think more generally. I think these authors mean these things maybe in a very generic sense.
Okay.
But I'm going to mark this, and I'll come back to you by going back to these two. My emphasis was just to say, look, there are these branches. My sense is that they're using these words in a very kind of flexible way to say that ultimately evaluation, right, is the act of putting value. There has to be some kind of stance on knowledge. Right? That's the epistemology part. There has to be some sense of society. That's the equity part. And some sense of relationships, which is the accountability part. I think that's the way in which they put these as roots. But I'll come back.
As in, this is what forms the basis of an evaluation, right?
Yeah. Well, not just of an evaluation, but of thinking about evaluation.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not about doing a specific evaluation, but how should we think of evaluation? We should think of it as a knowledge generating activity. We should think of it as an activity to do with society. We should think of it as an activity which is about relations between various, let's say, actors or stakeholders. Hence epistemology, equity, and accountability in that very broad sense. But in the way I'm saying it, nobody can really disagree, right? I mean, in that very broad sense that yes, there is knowledge creation, there is it is social, right? This is not kind of mathematical theorems or this is about understanding society, and this is about different actors and the relationships, right? Which is the accountability part. So that's a sense, but I will certainly check the sense in which these particular authors mean it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll also go back to this reading.
And this is, I think you will be able to locate this online. Otherwise, maybe we can. I think we are anyway planning to put up a folder, right? So we'll put this in. But yeah, my purpose, since you said, Naini, you were not clear. My purpose was not on those three terms of the root at the base, but my purpose of putting this was to say there are these branches. There are these three different kinds of priorities that you can put. Right, that I was just trying to point that out. Atanu, I think I see your hand.
I think Seema, Atanu, I think Seema had her hand up first.
Okay. Let Seema go. Then.
No, my question was same as Naini's, where I was looking at the literal meaning of the roots and the parameters on the roots. I perceived it as specifically those are the softer aspects of evaluation, and the branches are perhaps the harder implementation aspects of any evaluation. So you have to keep those softer aspects in mind and do the harder aspects of implementation in terms of values, methods, and the usefulness of the outcome of the evaluation. So I perceived it from that perspective. So just wanted to clarify if I was right.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Now we are really, now we have to see what the authors meant, because my purpose
Yeah.
being something else, I was not really focusing on that. So you're making an interesting distinction, Seema, softer and harder, right?
Yeah.
And also we need to discuss that
Because it
more.
talks about
Yeah.
social accountability. So if I'm doing an evaluation and coming up with a result which is not going to go and change or disturb the social fabric, right? So I have to be careful from that perspective as well. I might not be doing a true evaluation. I guess most of the research outputs at times are not published because of those reasons, right? Say, for example, in the pandemic case itself, if some organization would have done some research that, maybe booster is totally not required, or, does not add value, or even the second dose does not add value, even if it is true, the government would have had to suppress it from a social accountability perspective at some point of time.
Why is that? From a social accountability perspective, they might need to
see, because if you really look at the situation that time, right? And, such type of research, unless it is replicable to really actually come up with a solid conclusion that yes, this is the impact of the booster dose, or this is the impact of the second dose of the vaccination. For them to prove it to that extent, they might have to suppress it for a certain period of time at least, to ensure that it does not have a negative impact on the society. So that is more of the social accountability perspective of any evaluation, whether to publish that or not. I looked at it from that perspective, specifically from a softer perspective.
This is very interesting, because I think we all have particular meanings, right? Because these are big terms. Right?
Yeah.
So, accountability. So to me, accountability is about relationships. Well, like I said, the standard thing, if you look at, accountability initiatives, for example, right? Or many people who using this term nowadays mean it as these two things. It's answerability plus enforceability. If you want to, I don't want to make it like a little formula, but those are the key kind of dimensions. And so it's really relational in nature. So I don't know if the way in which you're meaning it. So these terms are big ones, right? Accountability, equity, epistemology. Yeah. So
I mean,
I'll do a
combined
little homework.
together, yeah, combined together, this is a research methodology course in itself, right? Just talking about these three terms.
It is, well, when we say things like research methodology, it really throws people off. It looks too academic, or it looks intimidating, right? But yes, if it's none of those things to you, you could say it is a research methodology course. It's just that when we say it like that, oh, I'm a practitioner, right? Right? I mean, so yeah, but in a sense, it is. See, if it is, which is why like I said, I like the word personally, value, right? If evaluation is about putting value, then it's a very fundamental, almost philosophical question, right? How do you put value? What do you, right? What is an appropriate way of putting value? What's an inappropriate way of putting value? Now, if you think, you could say that's what research methodology does. In that sense, sure, I think. But unfortunately, the way it's often practiced, it's too narrow. They don't ask what is, right? Why do I think end-line, baseline, some survey and some indicator, some target, and pull the plug or give more money, whatever, right? That game that we are familiar with. Why do I think that is in any way about putting value, right? So, so in that sense, yes, it's not just research methodology; it's philosophy in some sense, right? But yeah.
So may I?
Please.
Yeah, actually, this is, I have some wild guess actually. The first branch, which is actually talking about accountability, I think this is kind of, we are trying to find out the relationship with the society. And the method, second one is, I think the process we are actually adopting while evaluating. And third one, the epistemology part, which actually bring Naini, and she's asking about how epistemology. It is again my wild guess. Uh, Maybe when we are putting something like when we are looking through gender lens or caste or anything, the it's derived from epistemic actually foundation. So it is not in isolation any values. So definitely there are some epistemic foundation, and that is why we are taking gender, or we are taking class angle or class lens or anything. So in that case, epistemology is very relevant, but I am not sure whether the particular author they actually mean for that. So
Yeah,
I
I
am
think
eager
that's what
to
it's coming
learn.
down to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Rahul, I was anyway going to check in with Dvitiya and Rahul if they have some thoughts on this, because we're talking about specific, what particular set of authors, right, meant by it. So we'll certainly, share this reading. Those interested, can look at it and we can come back on it. But Rahul, um,
No, I just felt, and again, I don't want to take wild guesses, and it would be good to go back to the paper and have a look if you're interested in the roots. But given that the branches have been divided and they have specific significance, and the roots are basically undivided, in some way, I think what the authors are conveying, probably in the paper, is all these three: the epistemological part, the equity part, and the accountability part, bears different kinds of linkages with each of the branches. So when I'm thinking about evaluation being informed by a valuing perspective, my epistemological considerations or and understanding of what is the nature of knowledge, what is the nature of equity, and what is social accountability would be very, very different from when I think about evaluation as valuing methods. So that's what I think. But anyway, we can go back to the paper.
yeah, we'll go back. That was the sense, Rahul, I also had, that these three can take particular emphasis, right? So it can take a methods emphasis, it can take a value, but whichever emphasis, it does draw on all three.
Right.
But maybe in different ways, right? So the root is one, but the branches are different kind of thing. But the things written in the root are so big, right, conceptually, that I think to make more progress, we need to maybe slightly fix what we mean by these terms. Also,
Right.
epistemology, because now we know that epistemology is not just a cognitive or intellectual thing, right? People talk about affect or emotions, right? In the construction. So because traditionally we think of epistemology as something to do with the mind and not the heart, so to speak, right? So these things. So I think, yeah, maybe to make a bit more progress, we might need to know what they mean, because these are big terms. And if I remember, I don't think they mean by accountability what today we mean by accountability in India. Which anyway, there is no one right sense.
How old is this paper?
My smart turn as a teacher would be to note this on Naini and ask her for a presentation next week, 10-minute presentation on to unpack this for us. So
Thank you for the opportunity, Rahul. I'll take you up on that.
You
would love
disturbed the hornet's nest, and so now it's your
I would love to.
responsibility.
These are interesting philosophical questions at some level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Carden and Alkin have other work on which they look at. In fact, I think the title of this piece also international perspective. So they look at perspective from Africa, the perspective from India they bring. So here you may not be that thrilled, but is the community report card that PAC, this organization based out of Bangalore, spearheaded. Samuel Paul is associated with him. They've been doing this for decades now. Before a lot of others did, the citizen report card, they call it, on various things. And so they talk about how in different parts of the world, people have different ways of thinking about evaluation, which emphasize different branches, right? And the India one I remember was this kind of citizen report card. But yeah, it's interesting. So because a lot of this is really Western, but in this particular case, they're trying to bring it to a kind of a non-Western world. Yeah, good. So I think, as Rahul suggests, let's come back to it.
Yeah.
Should we take when have you budgeted for a break, Suraj?
Yeah. I was thinking now is the time for a breakout session and break. So maybe Rahul and others, if you can suggest what order to do it. So we are sort of halfway, a little past halfway. So maybe we could do a chai type break, a few minutes. Let's hear from participants how you might want it. And the other thing then to do is to what we were thinking is to have some kind of small group discussions, short ones, where you can all think about from your perspective, from your experience at Vikramaශීලා or elsewhere, right? What has evaluation meant in your experience? Right? The question Atanu asked, faulty design, right? Does that qualify as evaluation? Is it the kind of, I'm also slightly maybe making a kind of straw man out of this by saying baseline, endline, ye ho gaya evaluation, right? I mean, I'm not really doing justice. Even the mainstream is more complex than that. But there are different versions. So our hope was in small groups, we can do a little bit of discussion on what evaluation has practically meant in each person's experience. Right, that's the idea. So how should we do it? I guess is the question. Should we first have a short break, meet, and then do kind of small group? Vidya, Rahul, others, any thoughts?
My suggestion is that if we create the groups, have the question specified, and that and allocate time, and it includes tea time and break time as well as discussion time. Is that okay, Namrata?
That sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many of us are there besides, if we leave out Aditya, me, and Suraj?
I think 16.
16. So
I can
maybe
see 19 participants.
Yeah. So four groups of 4 members each, or 8 groups of 2 members. What do you prefer?
We are 20 participants.
Okay.
Hello.
Not 20.
Okay.
We are me and Ria is joined from a same device.
Okay. There are 17 then. Okay.
17.
So
I think 4 groups of 4 and 1.
And yeah. And what we'll do is create 4 rooms and randomly allocate, and then except for.
But then when are we returning? I mean, time?
That's Suraj. How much time for the? And
I think the idea was just a brief, right? Just to get thinking about it rather than exhaustively discussing. So I think 15 minutes, max 20 minutes discussion would be sufficient. No, Rahul?
Yeah.
Plus the tea.
Plus the tea. Yeah. I think it's 6:10 by my laptop watch. So if we can come back by 6:25 max. So
yeah, if that's good. And so the question, I don't know if it's sharp enough, but the idea is to get each group to discuss what has been your exposure and experience. You might have done evaluations or have had evaluations done on programs you're associated with. So what were the things on which they were putting value? I mean, they may not have used that kind of language, of course,
yes.
But now when you look at it, right, what was it that they were putting a value on? That's the kind of question. I hope that's clear enough. Yeah.
I'll just create the rooms and then I'm doing a random allocation for the time being. And it would be good to have somebody just summarize the discussions. Maybe we may not be able to take up all the notes. We just do a random kind of a thing. You'll get a message to join, and if you can please, Namrata, you don't want to join?
I have not got the messages.
Yeah, I think because we're co-hosts, Neni, Namrata ji,
Oh,
and
sorry,
I.
sorry.
Oh,
Okay.
all of
Yeah.
us. Right.
Unassigned. Namrata, Vaishali unassigned.
Okay, shall I? Yeah, we'll just manually assign. Assign to which group? Which is fewer number?
I think
In
all
room-
groups. Room 1
Room
has
two
4
has
people.
3
3
people.
and 4 have 3
Okay,
each.
Namrata goes
2,
to
3
2.
for 1 each.
Assign to 2. Vaishali assign to. Assign to 3.
Thank you.
Why is Naini still around?
Yeah.
But I can't see her also here because she's the host, I think. She's not showing up also here from my.
Yeah,
I
it's
can
not
see her,
showing me
Rahul.
either.
I'm right here.
No,
No,
as in
one
it's
end.
not showing a list of participants. Sorry.
No, this isn't the list of participants. Okay, I'll.
So if you have the ability to just join any room, then you should, Nani. Just pick a room, yeah, doesn't
I
matter.
do. I
Yeah,
do.
we can't see you. We can't see you.
So there's 3 people in room 4. I'll join that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we see ourselves joining and observing some rooms as well as SSP?
Do that, I think. Depending on Suraj needs a break probably, but we can do that. Go ahead.
I thought Rahul designed this so he gets a 20-minute tea break.
No, I got my tea, working tea. So I took my laptop and got my tea. Yeah. So I can. Yeah. No, you can get a tea break, Suraj. You've been doing
It's
most
going
of the
okay,
time.
right?
Yeah.
Too early
Yeah.
to really,
Yeah.
And we can check with them.
I think
What-
I'm just going to join some room. This.
Yeah.
What we need to make sure though is the TAL gets covered, right, today.
Yeah.
So if we work backwards,
Right.
right, after we join, we'll only have an hour left.
Mhm.
Right.
And so do we want to end with TAL and discussion? Because, and that's half an hour, right? Which means I have half an hour after, right? So,
Right.
so 6:30 we come up to 7, I'll just continue this a little bit. And then we'll have 7 to 7:30 TAL video clarification, and then Vidya can talk about the post read and
Right.
assignment. Right, all of that in the last half hour. Is that or
No, it's not. That's not a problem. I'm just wondering, are you going to share? Will you have time to share the questions before that, or do you just want them to? Will we just share the presentation and say, these are the questions you need to look at for the post?
yeah,
That's the thing.
yeah, that's right. I need to put the questions for the assignment to make sense.
Right. Or maybe we could or we could just send these 3 slides
To Nani later.
subsequently and say these are the guiding
Right.
questions for the post read.
Right.
Good point. I'll see if I can at least get there, even if I don't
Right.
discuss in detail.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Which room are you going to? So I won't join that.
Sorry, I just closed the window. I have no idea. Do you have a recommendation? I think I'm going to join.
Choose one. I'll choose system.
Sorry, say that again.
Where I'll go to where Namrata. I'll go to room 1.
Sure, and I'll do 2 then. Okay.
See, everybody is somehow returning with a smile, right?
Because no one got a break, I think. Or at least our group didn't get a break. because
No,
thanks to
we took the break first and then did the
Same.
discussion later.
Same. We put value to the break.
Yeah, if you put values, then the discussion is going to lose out to the T. Yeah, what's a good way to sort of quickly get some ideas?
Yeah, some groups were summarizing, and I think generally they were going in kind of a order, and there was a facilitator in our group. So Namrata or Atanuda was taking the lead as usual, but Namrata, if you could sum up, I also have some thoughts, but if you could quickly, just maybe 2 minutes, just a summary of the thoughts.
Sure. So I'll quickly share that we had Debanjana, Megha, Atanuda, and me in the group. And, because of our own experiences, we have different understanding about the term evaluation. As you know, for example, for Debanjana, as she is very new in this, she is still thinking from a perspective when she is developing a tool about, the kind of subjectivity that an evaluator brings in. So, it's very, very important to actually see, the rationale behind a numeral that is put to the, forefront, and what's the rationale behind it that is still missing. So that is something she's concerned about right now. Then we went ahead and we heard Megha. She said that somehow subconsciously and unconsciously also we are using a lot of different methods of evaluation, and we just don't know the exact name or the technical term that we have for it. And but we are using a lot of different methods right now. Atanuda mentioned about in the third perspective of the external evaluation. So whenever an external evaluation is happening, what kind of values the external brings in, whether the person is coming with a preconceived notion can change the whole game. And at the end of the process it becomes a namesake activity. We talk about bringing in the gender lens, the social caste or social class lens, but ultimately it becomes the same mundane process. So what can be done in that case? And while we were concluding the session, I had a point in my head that because we are, all of us are coming from a different background, we connect to this term evaluation from this different perspective. For example, for me, because I have been a teacher in a classroom, I don't like the term evaluation at all. I like assessment better. And for that matter, I try to refrain myself from evaluating a lot, and I love to capture the stories when I'm in the field. So instead of evaluating every now and then, I try to kind of capture the stories and the rationale and what happened, why happened, and what special happened in the field. But that sometimes that evaluation is also important. So our process may derive from the person who is doing it, like what kind of values they are bringing in the process. So I think we have a lot of heterogeneity in this process, and I think after the workshop maybe we can have a common language to talk about it. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Namrata. Any other group? Maybe we just have another group, and we will probably share some kind of an ongoing doc where this can be a discussion forum. And if somebody has recorded, I would request all the group leads to post their thoughts onto that doc and others to comment on it. I think it would be nice to have that kind of a dynamic conversation going. But any other group which wants to present and go ahead. Yeah, Vaishali, go ahead.
Hi. So in our group, we had Shayanda, Aditya, and Samarpitadi, and myself. So by and large, all four of us, we always thought of, in our experience, evaluation has been the conventional assessment ki, acha ye target tha, how much have we achieved with our intervention or our activities. So that was a conventional experience all of us have had. But after today's, discussion, I reflected upon this one thing, and then I thought that, okay, I've actually done that value addition sort of a exercise. So I was a part of this scheme analysis exercise with this IS officer in Chhattisgarh, and he was a commissioner of the labor department. And basically, after the labor migration crisis, he wanted us to analyze the different schemes that are available across different departments, not just the labor department. So let's say if there's the education department, he wanted us to see if a particular scheme can, be beneficial for that laborer's child or not. So he wanted us to do that, but in that he asked us to specifically put the gender lens. So let's say it was an Excel sheet, usme tha male, female, transgender, universal. Then there was something to do with physical abilities. तो उसमें था कि blind है, mute है, या कुछ motor disability है. So then he wanted us to see if there's a particular scheme, अगर उसमें लिखा है कि ये योजना महिलाओं और पुरुषों के लिए है, then he asked us to say कि ये इसमें universal में cross कर दो, transgender में cross कर दो. Similarly, अगर books के ऊपर है, तो books में braille की books हैं या नहीं है, तो उस पे अगर braille की books specified नहीं है, तो then उसको cross कर दो. So so that's when I thought that, okay, that's an exercise where we did put value to these things also. And in retrospect now, I think that I should have filled my form also differently, because I've had the experience to experience evaluation like that.
Others in the group? Vaishali?
Yeah, so the summary, I would say that conventionally all of us have had that experience, but I also have had that experience to put value to certain things when we're trying to evaluate something.
Naini has put something in chat. For Rashmi, the idea of evaluation was knowing the impact of the project and using the outcome of evaluation for future programs. Yeah, maybe we can just stop here. I think all the groups would have had interesting ideas and diversity. Even in the small group which I was there was obviously a kind of a difference in terms of perspectives from where each one was coming from and experiences at the field level. So if you can take some time out between this session and the next session, like Namrata is suggesting, we have a shared Google Doc, and this could be for the other such open-ended kind of breakout sessions where we summarize our thoughts, and we could also comment on each other's kind of thoughts. We will take time out to go through them also. Yeah, over to Suraj.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. I think even in that short period, I think a lot of interesting things came out, and it can be a running doc, right? I mean, when you go back and we have a couple of weeks before we meet again, more things hopefully will occur, and so that would be very nice. We'll move on, but maybe the last point that Namrata raised, because of, she said, experience as teacher and so on, that you're always, hesitant. Evaluation seems right, and I think that's a very interesting. You're actually putting a kind of very different value, right, on not evaluating. Almost asking, who am I to evaluate, right? I mean, as they say, only God only knows, or whatever, right? I mean, who am I, right, to because the sense of judging, or and many teachers, I think often have this. How am I going to, right? I mean, it's somebody put it into some framework that I'm privileging, but who's to say, right? I think that's a very nice and very rare quality in evaluation. We take it for granted, right? But to question whether evaluation should be done, right? It's sort of, I think you were going there. I think that's nice. It's so rarely done that we don't ask that. The question is how best to do it in the most sensitive, philosophically appropriate way, rather than, who the hell am I to put any value on anything, right? Almost that. I think that's a very interesting thought. All right, let's move on. So I think, as we said, this is an introductory session today, and it will spill over into a good part of the next session. Let's see how much we can get done today. So we'll move on to the term comprehensive evaluation. So the way in which we will be presenting evaluation through the series of many sessions through this course is what we will call comprehensive, because it will have many aspects and many real world evaluations may not cover all these aspects, right? So we are really trying to think of what all in an intervention should we put a value on, right? In a comprehensive sense. So specifically, here's how it looks like. One is the evaluation of design, what Atanu already mentioned, right? So we do think, for reasons which he sort of indicated at least, that it is important to put a value on, to understand, right, aspects of design. Within that, there are many things involved, which we will come to little by little, putting a value on need, putting a value on the form that a program takes, putting a value on how you imagine a program to work. So there are terms for all this, theory of change and so on. The second aspect is to evaluate implementation, how the program unfolds, right? Again, there are many things that we will look at. So each of these will have lots of central questions to ask, right? So we'll spend time in this course on evaluating design, on evaluating implementation, and in evaluating impact. Increasingly, a lot of the kind of emphasis in this field is on impact, and with good reason, and we will certainly take a good bit of time to do that. So this course is really about evaluating design, implementation, and impact, and we'll have many sessions on each of these, right? And when it comes to impact, we are looking not only at the extent of impact, but also the processes involved. I think what Nani had asked earlier, right, about the how part, how something impact was created, not just how much impact, but how. So the processes through which impact occurs, which doesn't get captured in things like, oh, there was a 15% improvement in some outcome indicator, right?
Yeah.
That's a how much and not a how point. So all of that will belong within the evaluation of impact. So there are these three big ones. Throughout, we will pay attention, often implicitly, to ethical issues when it comes to design, when it comes to implementation, and when it comes to impact evaluation. Okay, so more on this when we get there, but since this is a value-laden enterprise, we need to talk about it, throughout. Whether or not it is done in real-world evaluations, often it is done, maybe not as much as we would want, but we have the luxury in a course to really probe it to its fullest. We will also look at the use that evaluations are put to. This idea of evaluation as looking back and in principle enabling us to look forward. Right? The evaluation itself is about looking back, but that could in principle allow us to look forward in terms of scaling up, down, and so on. So these also belong, right? So, but centrally, this course is about evaluating design, evaluating implementation, evaluating impact, keeping the ethics and this specific idea of use in mind. So a diagrammatic way of understanding, a very simple diagrammatic way of understanding an intervention, you would have seen this kind of formulation, I think, in many places. You have a set of inputs, which become a set of activities, which produce a set of program outputs. And those program outputs then trigger a set of social processes, which create some kind of social outcome. We'll come back to this. So here the boxes are the kind of are the stocks, right? There's input, right? Things that you can measure at a point in time. Inputs, outputs, outcomes. And the purple, the activities are flows, and the social processes are flows. So this is a simple way of thinking about an intervention, right? You have a set of inputs which get combined in interesting ways, activities, program activities, to produce something that we will call outputs, program outputs. Those program outputs change things, something in society or that part of society that we're looking at through a set of what we'll call social processes to get to social outcomes. I know, Rakesh, just hold on. I see your hand raised. This is just a conceptual diagram. It's not as linear as it looks in the real world. There are lots of loops between these, but this is a useful and conventional way of thinking about it. So we'll have a lot more to say about it. But before that, yes, Rakesh, please go ahead.
So I just want to understand why we have used the term here social. Activities, inputs, activities, program output, outcomes, all things, all are, I can understand, but social is any specific reason?
Yes, and it's I think a good point. It's very kind of deliberately used, right? The word social. So one way to think about it, Rakesh, briefly now, we'll come back to this later, but briefly, is that the inputs and the activities which produce program outputs, this is very much in the program space. Of course, that program space is located in some aspect of society. If you're doing an education program, might be located in some school or some learning setting, right? But the emphasis in the input activity output part is in the program, which itself is nested in society, right? But the rest of it, from program outputs to social outcomes through social processes, the word social is being emphasized there because a program output, the way in which it changes society comes once that output happens, right? Till then, it's a matter of getting that program to work in a particular way. It might work in a different way than planned, but once the program produces some output, the question is, how is that converted to some change in society? So an example would be, so many contact hours in a classroom setting, right? Is a program output that you have a teacher and the teacher teaches several sessions in a particular manner, right? Covering certain material. So that would be the output of that program. The program is, let us say, an educational program, right? Of getting the teacher to do some activities, right? Now, from that program output, what difference does it make to society? Here, society would be, let us say, the learning, the participants in learning. Imagine it's a school and there are some children, right? Students. So that would be the part of society. And maybe this will also affect things in their homes, in their neighborhoods. So the fact that there was a program output, that is so many classroom sessions of a certain sort, of a certain quality were delivered, right? That then triggers various processes, let us say processes of learning among these children in the classroom, outside the classroom, in their homes, to lead to some outcome. So the learning outcome here is a social outcome, in the sense that it is outside the immediate program space, because the program space can directly control up to the output. But what that output triggers and changes among participants, right, is not something which the program can directly control, right? So kids might attend those classroom sessions, but it may or may not, right, change learning in ways that were intended, right? So here the word social is being used to talk about that part of society that's ultimately what this program was intended to impact. But there could also be unintended changes. So here the word social, so in the specific example I'm giving, the social outcome would be the learning changes in these kids. And maybe their attitudes to society, or maybe any further ripples in their homes, right, in their relationships with others. All of that would be social outcomes. Rakesh, does that distinction make sense?
Yeah, thanks. I'll have my follow-ups later.
Yeah. So we'll come back to this many times. Yeah. So we are using the word social in the most generic sense here, right? Now, for particular kind of education programs, maybe most of the outcomes are learning related outcomes, but not always, right? So the word social is the most general. This applies to any program, an explicitly educational program or some other kind of program, right? The output triggers something which changes some aspect of society. That's what we're calling social outcome. Yeah.
Suraj, there's a question from
So,
sir.
given that,
Suraj,
and I'm sure you've seen some
Suraj.
version of yes.
There's another question, something. Which
Oh,
Naini
oh.
was,
Yeah,
Sorry,
there's a
sorry, go
question.
ahead.
Yeah, there's a question from Atanu sir here. Have we taken that up? Should we think about social consequence in the design stage?
Yeah. So I think, again, a good question. Keep that, please, Atanu. We'll definitely come to it. It's a big enough thing that we'll spend a good bit of time. In fact, the idea of a program theory and a theory of change, they're a little different, but they're quite connected, is about trying to systematize our expectations about social change, social outcome change in the design stage. That's what really a theory of change is meant to do. Whether or not it does so, how we do it, we'll see. But the theory of change is meant to do precisely that. So a theory of change, therefore, it will come in the evaluating design part, where the design is meant to connect with outcomes which are yet to occur. So yes, Atanu, the short answer is yes, but we'll spend a fair bit of time on this point. Yeah. Okay, I think I can move on. So the course plan is put in this table here on the left. I think there's a bit of flexibility, but the current plan, right, is to have this kind of elaborate introduction, which we are still in the middle of, then move on to some sessions, sessions 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 4 sessions on evaluating design, sessions on evaluating implementation, and then sessions on evaluating impact. Okay. And then we will spend several sessions sort of threading it together, talking about methods, ethics, uses, though methods, ethics, uses will also show up in the other kind of modules in the evaluating of design, implementation, impact, but we will spend some very specific time on it towards the end. And I've just put a little bit of color coding. I don't know if the color coding is coming through. That is, the red is the evaluating impact, the purple is evaluating implementation, dark blue is evaluating design, and kind of connect it with this diagram, right? So the social processes to social outcomes in red is the impact part, because by impact we mean something outside the running of the program, right? How it changes society. By society, it could be learning levels of kids, right? But whatever it is. So that's the red. The purple, the program activities to program outputs, is the implementation part. That's so that's evaluating implementation. And the stuff in blue is the design, right? Ideating and coming up with a design is the evaluating design. So I actually went through it backwards. If you want to go it the other way around, design, that's the dark blue on the left. So there in the table, and you can correlate it with the ideation to designing and putting together the inputs. The implementation is going from input through activities, through flow of activities to outputs. That's the implementation space. And then from outputs to the triggering processes which create some kind of social change, in the sense in which I meant it when I responded to Rakesh. That's the impact space, right? So in this literature, typically outcomes, impact, these kinds of terms are used to talk about change in society. The term output is used to talk about what the program delivers, stopping short of the triggering changes in society, right? So there is this distinction between output and outcome. We'll come back to it in a big way. It's something I'm guessing many of you are aware of, but we'll come to it. Yeah. So ideation and the flow of ideas to create a design. That's evaluating design. From that, inputs through activities to output is implementation. That's the purple. And from what the program delivers as outputs to what changes it creates in society in this sense is the stuff in red. It's the impact, right? That's where society comes in, even though, of course, the program is nested in society, but the rest of it is much more programmatic. Hence the word program, being used there. This is more social, hence the word social here. Yes, Namrata, please, yeah.
Yeah, so I have actually two questions. One is a very basic question because the course was named as M&E course. So are we also going to talk about monitoring and the relation that it has with evaluation? That is one question. And the second question is because there are a lot of terms like, design, implementation, TOC, RF indicators, and a lot. And we are exposed to these terms, by the funders as and when needed. So is there a sequence to them? Is there a process to it? And are we also going to talk about it in the process? Like, for example, if I talk about M&E, so, there is an M&E framework and then there is M&E tool. Both are very important for a program or a project. So how do we actually arrive at a framework and how from that framework we go and, develop tools? So, what's the process? Is there a linear process for that or, like how do we do it?
As you can guess, in the real world, it is not linear.
Absolutely.
In prescription, yes, of course, some best practice linear is put. But to come back to your first, I think these are good things to clarify. We will definitely talk about monitoring. You will see that monitoring can be one way to interpret it is one aspect of evaluation. Right? So monitoring will come, for example, is an aspect of evaluating implementation, right? Because it is about ongoing and trying to understand how it is going, but in ways in which we can maybe make tweaks, right? Learning to tweak as you're implementing, right? That's really what monitoring is. So one way to think about it is monitoring is a part of the purple thing here, evaluating implementation. That said, there are distinctions, right? So we will, it's stuck into that. That's one thing. But many of the general ideas of evaluation apply to monitoring as well, right? We'll have more to say about this, but definitely monitoring will be part of it. But the way we are visualizing this, as you can see, monitoring is embedded within one aspect of evaluation. So that's one. The other thing you're saying, I think it's an important question, right? Getting the capacity for framing, right? And operationalizing into tools, right? Both. So what we are thinking of doing is, as we are going through each of these, evaluating design, evaluating implementation, evaluating impact, we will start with the kind of what's the idea, right? In what sense is it putting a value, that kind of the framing. But we'll also talk a little bit about how is this operationalized, right? In each of these. So that's one. But as you can see from this schedule here, we have put time at the end, right? Methods, ethics, uses, where we can spend we are hoping to spend some time on the tooling part, right? There's a bit of flexibility depending on how much interest there is. Now, details of tools and so on, right, is beyond the scope of this. I think more important is kind of the big picture, but we don't want to leave it there, right? So we want to go part of that way, even though, so into how do you operationalize some of that framing into tools, whether it's about design, implementation, or impact. So short answer is it's going to happen in each of these, the framing and the tools, but we also can spend a bit more time with specific aspect, how, monitoring tools, MIS, this, that, and the other, right? A little more time, beyond those weeks in those last 4 sessions. But there, I think there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of how much we want to do that. And partly, I think it'll be driven by, I think, your own interests, because we can do the epistemology part, right? We want to do it all, of course, but again, it's a matter of how much, I don't know, Dvitiya, Rahul, on this particular question, if you have anything to add on frameworks and tools.
Again, I am responding just as I responded on chat saying that there will be an actual activity which you would be engaging in terms of a particular program and working through this sequence of what we are doing in some sense theoretically or the learning exercise during a gap between the module 1 and the face-to-face module which we'll be having. There, I think we can come to tools, and you will also be probably not directly in terms of our intervention, but we can look at resources, different kinds of resources, and you can work in groups to learn more about tools at that part and that.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. Yeah, I think so. I think these specific activities and between modules, right? Between them will allow us to go more specific. I guess in our contact sessions, the emphasis will be on the framing, but then getting to a little bit of tools. But these assignments plus the between module thing, as Rahul is saying, because it's going to be specific, right? We'll be given specific program scenarios. Then we'll have to design specific. So there, that the focus will be more on that. All right. I'm going to quickly introduce a set of questions regarding each of these three big aspects of evaluation. Evaluating design. So there's the slide for that. Next slide, evaluating implementation, and the third, evaluating impact. Yeah. A whole bunch of questions, and just going to run through it a little fast because we're going to come back to it, okay, in the next session. So here are the set of questions which a good evaluation of design should address. You know, that point about that Atanu made, faulty design, right? Unpacking it. What is that, right? How do we put that value that it's faulty, it's good? So here are the kind of things here. Like I said, it might be a little much because I'm just going to run through it, but we'll circulate these things separately and we'll come back to this. So within design, what was the underlying problem, right? What was the justification for intervening in the first place? What was the need? Why choose this particular program? Because there might be some need, but there could have been different forms of programs, right? But why a particular form? Was that ideology? Was it because it's the strength of the NGO, right? Sometimes we just do certain thing we are used to doing, but there are different forms that a program can take. That's the second question. Third is, how is it expected to function, the program, right? The activities, right? Expectation. So this is still a design matter. Fourth is, how is the program expected to address the need? So how is it expected to trigger changes in society? And the fifth is, who did this design? What was their motivation, right? Can we bring values into this, particularly participatory values, right? So this is a set of questions. Like I said, we'll come back to this much more elaborate. But these are the kinds of questions that evaluation of design. And together, all of this we do, and then we can pronounce something as more faulty, less faulty, right? Atanu's point, right? But it involves going through these. Quickly, in the implementation part, again, a whole bunch of questions that we will unpack. Were the activities mostly implemented? Are there gaps between what you thought you would do in terms of activities and what you ended up doing? If so, why? What explains them? What were the indicators of implementation? Sometimes, typically, we think of some kind of quantitative, but we can rethink this, right? What is the evidence, you know, on the basis of which we say something was implemented as planned or not implemented? That's the question of indicators. Did activities change over time? You know, in fairly complex interventions, right? Activities also change, right? You learn, you try out, there are pilots embedded within a program and so on. So what is the nature of change in implementation over time? What justifies it? How was it justified by the implementers or the designers? Who was involved in implementation? Was it participatory? And you can see question 5 here brings in monitoring. That is tracking and feedback in the process of implementation, right? Was it satisfactory? What is its nature? Was it participatory? A whole bunch of questions around implementation. And finally, a whole bunch of questions around impact. That's the social part in the sense in which, you know, we talked, the question Rakesh had asked. What was the impact? Impact in inverted commas there, because that has to be, what do we mean by impact, right? It's something to think about rather than assume. were appropriate indicators used? How do we gauge impact empirically? Who was impacted? Who wasn't impacted? Why? Did the impact address the need? But do we stop at just that, or do we look at unintended things which happened, which were not part of the design? But there was still some change which was unanticipated. Does that also count? Could be what we think as positive or negative change. That question 5 is longer term impacts, because impact also could be initial, right? Imagine children in a classroom, they learn something, but over time, right, that might have other implications, right? So how can we gauge social change over a longer period of time? What would that entail? What were the social processes which actually occurred? And then values of participation particularly. So a whole bunch of questions to do with that space after output, right? But leading to and beyond outcome. So that's the set of questions. What we will do is we'll circulate these set of questions for you to think about, but I did it a little hurriedly right now. So we'll come back to these questions a little more systematically at the beginning of next session, but we will also be doing it in the context of a particular program. So you can see that these questions are fairly abstract, right, for a generic program. So what we are now going to do is introduce a very specific program that Pratham is associated with, because it's been very well documented. We'll use that case. So we'll right now, for the rest of today's session, introduce that case. And then these questions that I kind of hurriedly went over regarding design, implementation, and impact, we'll circulate it to you. You can think about them, and we'll come back to how to think about some of these questions in the context of that particular intervention of program of Pratham. Right? So we'll come back to these questions, but in a more kind of a grounded way. That's the plan. So the program of Pratham that we'll be introducing is called Teaching at the Right Level, TAL. Some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not. The idea right behind the program is something that many of you might be doing in other programs. So we'll be taking the version that Pratham did, so that we can use that example that we to get into some of these questions regarding design, implementation, and impact. So I'll hand it over to Dvitiya, who will take us through, and Rahul will take us through the specific program in order for us to come back to these questions here. So.
Thanks, Suraj. Should I play the video, or do you have access to it, and anyone will you play? Well, actually, let me just try and play, and if it doesn't work for whatever reason, then maybe let me just
the
share
sound
screen.
might be a problem, but yeah, check.
Yeah, we'll just see. 1 sec.
And just to quickly ask, how many are familiar with TAL? Have you come across this initiative of Pratham, Teaching at the Right Level? Just a quick show of hands.
Sorry, I can't see hands.
Yeah, Namrata is familiar.
Okay. I mean, it's not at all critical to the course that you know the case at all, and we're in no way saying that this is a well implemented program or any such thing, right? The thing that we're saying is that it's a well documented program, and it has been evaluated for over a decade now in multiple phases, multiple formats. So there's a lot of information about evaluation of this program, and that's the only reason we're using it. So I'm just going to share briefly a video. This link will possibly share with you overall as well. It's an hour-long video, but we'll only look at the first 15 minutes of this, in which Rukmini Banerjee, who sort of runs Pratham, she gives a brief, like a very high-level brief on what the program is.
I don't think from our end we are able to control the PowerPoint.
Just give me 1 second.
To the presenters, if we have material, I think I'll just start. Yep.
Just checking audibility. Can you hear?
Yes, we could hear.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to play then.
Is that okay?
Yes, Devyani, I think you have control now if you want to try moving through the slides.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
So we've been given 10 minutes to tell you what we've been doing for 20 years. So let's see if we are able to do that sufficiently to get you interested in wanting to do this yourself. Okay. I've tried to keep it at just 10 things we want to say, and hopefully some of the questions to any of us on the panel will help. So very quickly, the problem is well known, so I don't think we need to dwell too much on that. In India, like in many other places, almost everyone is in school, or very large numbers of kids are in school, but clearly we have a that at least half the children, even after they get to 5 years of school, are still unable to do some of the basic stuff, and similarly with arithmetic. Reasons for this, many theories, people have different views. The way we've been looking at it is, I think, along the lines of what Lance Pritchett calls over-ambitious, negative consequences of over-ambitious curriculum, that we have an, like with many other countries, we have a very linear age grade set of curricular expectations from children as they move through the school system. And so by the time you get to whatever, 2nd grade or 3rd grade, the assumption is that the kids have mastered whatever it is that they should have learned in those years. And so the teacher then teaches from what she's expecting the children to know, rather than from the children, where the children are. And the end result is, I think, what we see. I think Abhijit and Esther call it teaching to the top of the class, and different people call it by different names. But it leaves behind a massive numbers of kids who are not able to do even the basics, despite being in school. And I think the problem in India, probably other places as well, that many parents of children who are in school today don't have much schooling themselves, so they can't really help the kids. Very quickly, just to look at concrete dimensions of the problem, I've pulled out the latest USSR report, 2016, which gives us a very large sample of kids, and I think is able to show us the problem in a kind of a very clear way. So if you look at this table, and if we just look at grade 5, you'll see that about half, 47.8% of kids are able to read the highest level that we have in the USSR test, which is a grade 2 level text. So, we know that there are at least half the kids who are able to do basic things, but the other half is really the set of kids that we are concerned about. And you can see that it's not only a low level, but that the tail of the distribution is quite long. So even in 5th grade, among those who can't read, we have a big amount of variation. And so really the challenge for the teacher who's standing in front of the class with the 5th grade textbook, which is far, far higher than this, is that who should she direct her attention to, and what should she teach the kids that she decides to teach. And I think that is one of the reasons that we see the situation as it is, because teachers will then decide to do what the textbook thinks she ought to be doing, and that will only reach some percentage of the kids who are in my top half. And those are the kids who are going to move ahead. So this is just a concrete illustration of the problem that we are handling. Over the years, I think looking at the situation, what we've evolved is now being called teaching at the right level. Somebody asked me some time ago, what is the right level? And I said that right level is a level at which the child is. So if you start from where the child is and then move towards where you think the child ought to be, that is really the strategy that seems to be working for us. So regardless of age or grade, we start from the level of the child, and the way we define the level of the child is really, if you look at the column headings on my third slide, just the previous slide, you can see that at least for language or for reading, it's useful for us to categorize our kids into those 5 levels: those who can't read any letters at all, those who can read letters but not words, those who can read words but not yet sentences, and so on. And we know that that's where the kids are. And substantial numbers of kids, even in 4th or 5th grade, are at these different levels. So starting from that level, focusing on some of the basic foundational skills, reading, obviously with understanding, being able to express their own views, and some of the foundational building blocks in arithmetic, that's really what teaching at the right level is. And we spend just a few minutes kind of going through the key elements of those. So the first element starts with, how do I know my children? Simple assessment. You see a Hindi version of it here. In India, we do it in whatever the medium of instruction may be, to try and figure out very quickly, one-on-one with each child, where the child is comfortably at today. Then we group the children based on these basic levels, and depending on the number of teachers or instructors that are available, we allocate them to the different groups. Then for each group, we have a set of activities that we will not discuss today. Perhaps there will be a different webinar to go through that. But we know that there are some common activities that kids can do, such as listening to a story. But then when we go into decoding activities, different groups need a different level of activities, a different intensity. So kids work in groups. They also do things as individuals. And as the intervention progresses, we use a similar assessment to just keep track of what progress the kids are making. Just very quickly, I don't want to spend much time because I think that's probably the subject of a much longer discussion. The key activities that we do in language and in math, we put them down here. You know, some reading, a lot of talk, discussion. The Indian languages have a very nice phonetic structure, so we have some phonetic charts on which we do chart-related activities, a lot of oral word games. And through this whole process, even for basically focusing on reading, we find that talking and writing are both very, work very well to sort of build the overall language capabilities. The math one, again, a lot of talk, simple activities with counting, using of some number charts, and then, you know, operations which are done really with some concrete objects. So I'm deliberately not going into the teaching learning part because I think that can be discussed in a later webinar. Moving to how is this solution actually done on the ground, we have 2 main models with which we work. One that we are calling our direct work, and the form that the direct work takes are these learning camps. The other model is when we work with the government. And on this slide, what we've tried to do is to give you kind of a broad overview of what is similar and what is different across these models. So our main work, our biggest work is done with kids who are in grades from 3 to 5, who are grouped by level and not by grade. And during the school day, some time is allocated, usually at least 2 hours, during the normal school day to work on this. When we work directly, it is a Pratham person who leads the activities and is supported by volunteers or by teachers. And we've worked out over a period of time and with evaluations helping to bring evidence about the effectiveness, that if you work in a camp mode, we usually do 8 to 10 days of intensive activity of this type then there is some gap time, and then we come back some days later and conduct a similar camp. And somewhere between 3 to 5 camps of this type, total number of days being either 30 to 50, we see significant improvement in children's learning. And interestingly, we've tried it without gaps and we've tried it with gaps, and the ones with gaps actually have higher results. And perhaps we can have a discussion on that later. When we work with the government, then the actual instruction is done by the school teachers. They are supported by officials who are above the school level, and we make sure wherever possible that those officials themselves have carried out at least 15 to 20 days of working with children themselves daily, so that they know what the nuances are, the nuts and bolts are of what the teachers will need. And in an ideal situation, these people who have done it themselves then lead the teachers through the entire process, so that it's a self-contained activity and the system itself can provide the inputs that the schools need. In both cases, we need to have a daily activity time which is set aside. And of all the models that we've done with governments, it usually lasted a period of 60 to 80 days for a whole variety of other reasons. But I think this could easily be, depending on the baseline, it could be a part of the school year for at least 4 to 5 months, at least in India, to reach the kinds of results that we do. I hear a lot of bells, so I think we should go through very quickly what we are saying. The next 2 slides are really to show you the kinds of results we have, both of which have also been evaluated, and I'm sure Jaypal will talk about those. Substantial and significant improvement in both types of models can be seen. And you know, the current slide, slide number 8, shows you the kinds of results we've been able to achieve with over 200,000 children last year. And the slide number 9 gives you an example from one of the states in which we have worked last year, again with substantial numbers of kids. I think this is almost 75,000 kids, in which even in a period of 60 days, you see reading levels going from from 40% all the way up to 75%, and big jumps also in arithmetic. We don't have time to talk about it today, but we have done some tracking of children in years after they've finished all this, and we find that there's a substantial amount of durability of these basic foundational skills that they get. So just to wind up, you know, just key things that we want people to remember is that these kids who are in school are often invisible, and so it's important that assessments like ASER or other things are done to actually bring out the fact that lots of kids are getting left behind even in early years. We know that just doing more of the same will not lead to significant gains, and so we found that a very clear set of goals, some kinds of very simple assessment to make the problem visible, these both help to gain attention for this very important problem, and then a new strategy is needed. Second point is that we found that the basic skills, reading and basic math, you work on those. Often we have governments who say we need to work on a whole variety of skills simultaneously, but we found that using some of these 2 or 3 basic building blocks, working on those and starting from where the child is, has proven to be very useful for us. And the third thing is that we find that when kids have been in school for a couple of years, they are also much more ready to pick up the kinds of capabilities that we are trying to build. And acceleration is much more easily possible for kids who are 7 and 8 and older, because I think they are developmentally more ready. So I just want to end with the fact that this is a big problem. In a big country like India, it's a huge problem. But the solution that we've come up with, we feel is quite easy to implement if people recognize the problem and are willing to work on it. And therefore, of all the problems that we face, this one, I think, has solutions. To me, this is, you know, low-hanging fruit. And, you know, if we in a complicated and chaotic country like India have been able to make good headway, surely people who are in simpler situations should be able to do better.
So,
Right. I'm assuming that was audible and made sense broadly. So to summarize, I think I'm just going to summarize the case again a little bit briefly in a minute or so, just so if anything was not immediately apparent. I mean, and we will talk about this case through the course. We will look at it at all points from design to implementation to impact and how all of these were evaluated or not, right? But so essentially, I think the problem that Pratham identified through ASAR, which is their own sort of annual, status of education report, they call it, and that it's a test, a basic test that's done in literacy and numeracy across the country, and it is now over like a decade since they've been doing it, and it's used often as a reliable measure almost of what the learning levels of children are. Disputed at times in certain ways, but let's say they use that metric to say where children are in a particular class, and how do you catch them up somehow to the level that they're supposed to be at, right? And their intervention is what is called Teaching at the Right Level. The program's called Teaching at the Right Level, and it has taken many shapes and forms over, I think, the last 15 years now. It's still being implemented across the country. And I think originally, one of the things that Rukmini did not speak about, and we will share a reading about it, is it was actually done in 3 different formats, and also done all 3 together or 2 or 3 of them together, things like that. So the first format was this Bal Sakhi, or a volunteer was planted sort of in the classroom, who's supposed to help the teacher, in which the children who are behind the class or behind the age the level at which they're supposed to be for that class, they're pulled out of the class and trained, right, to pick up and sort of help them bridge this gap. And then there is the version in which the teacher themselves sort of works with children in groups in the class. And the final version is a summer camp version, where children are supported during the summer break in order to be able to catch up. So they've tried all of these 3 versions and combinations of these as well in several states across the country. And depending on what the government's sort of appetite to absorb this is, it has taken whatever format, right? So that's broadly the program. And if there are any questions at this point on what this case is at a very high level, I'm happy to sort of answer them. And you can also watch this video fully. It's an hour-long video, it's a webinar. So if you would like to watch and know more, then it's totally available to you.
I'll circulate this video to the participants after
that would be great.
Yeah.
So I'll also share another reading, Nani, along with the 3 slides that Suraj just presented on the questions of design, implementation, and impact. And I think the assignment for the week that we're taking a break in is really to think about these questions in the context of Teaching at the Right Level program, right? So eventually, I think when we, at the end of the course or in the second module, what we would like you to do is think about each of these questions in relation to a program that you are involved in directly, right? And to think about how can you apply things that you're learning here to what you do in your day-to-day life. But right now, we want everyone to sort of think together on the same program, which is why we picked a case that's mostly related to the age groups that we work with. I mean, as Vikramshila, mostly related to the age groups that you all work with, as well as it's an education program. So there should be a lot of elements in this that feel relatable, right? That's why this case has been picked. So yeah, so we will share the link of the video, the other article that we would like you to read that describes the program in a bit more detail, and also the slides that Suraj just shared, so that you can try and answer those questions with teaching at the right level as the background. That is essentially the assignment for the week that's the break. And I think we would like, if it's not possible to answer all, right? You might not at this point have information with the video and the reading to answer all these questions. The attempt should be to place those questions in the context of TAL and see if you can. So how many ever you feel is possible, we would like you to give it a go, essentially, right? And I mean, Suresh should confirm, but I think we would like a document submission from each person for sure, so that we can get a sense of what thoughts have been around. And we will also have a few of you, you can nominate yourself, present what the experience was like in thinking about these things in context of those questions that Suraj shared, right? Yeah, I think that's broadly what I wanted to say. Anything else you want to add, Rahul, Suraj?
No, yeah, I just wanted to check from everybody, is that a reasonable expectation? I mean, you all have busy work lives, and you're sort of doing this in addition to all those other things. So is that, we have 2 weeks between, for the next, so the expectation is learn a little bit about TAL, the video plus this reading that we're going to circulate. Fairly, I think straightforward read. And then we'll circulate these 3 slides on a whole bunch of questions, which as you know, I just ran through them, but the questions are sort of, yeah, what was the need? Yeah, why did they decide to do it that way? How did they figure out that there was some change, right? They're just very commonsensical questions. And will you be able to sort of take some of those questions, a whole bunch of those questions, right? Take 2, 3, 4, whichever ones, and see whether, what does that mean for TAL with what you get from the reading? And as Dvitiya is saying, if you can write that down, just some thoughts on that. The question is that feasible?
We'll all try to attempt it, and maybe next week we can sync up how far we are going with it, right? So I think it's best we start, if not all, from each of those 3 categories, few questions we'll done. Yeah.
That's perfect. And I think we're right on time according to my clock. So it's been, I can imagine it's been a long day. So Suraj, anything else we need to talk about?
No. So when we meet in the next session, 2 weeks from now, yeah, those of you who can, and thanks Seema and I think Shubhra for proactively saying, yes, you're going to give it a go. Hopefully others will make a little bit of time. Yeah, the TAL thing is, please try to familiarize yourself a little bit, because it's good to have a running example. And as Dvitiya said, we could take any, but this one is very well documented from an evaluation perspective. That's the only reason, not to say it's good or bad at the program itself, but yeah. So that familiarization will be handy for us in later sessions as well, because we can refer back to one thing that we are all on a common page on. So if you can give this a go. So what we will do next session is discuss a little bit, the questions that you tried, made sense, didn't make sense in the context of TAL. And then we will do the first half or first 2/3 of next session, finishing up our kind of introductory, and then slowly moving to the first of our, which is starting the evaluating design part, which we'll then spend a few sessions on. So that's the plan for next week.
Next week we don't have a session.
Thank you.
16th, right?
Yeah, we're meeting on the
16th, yes.
So thanks a lot, Suraj, Vidya, Rahul. It's been a great session. if anyone else wants to add any points.
No, I think it was a really engaging session, and thank you, Suraj, for being so patient with my questions. They were quite endless, I do realize. And yeah, thank you so much for the session.
And luckily, these questions will keep coming back. I mean, that's why this is introductory. So it's nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.